Yo, what's going on, Dragon Ballers? Welcome back to another Top Cut breakdown video. In today's video, we have a regional from London to report on, so we'll talk about that in the video. If you guys are new here, though, make sure to subscribe, hit that bell so you never miss a Dragon Ball Super video. And if you guys want to help support the channel, there are many ways to do so down in the description. But of course, today we're talking about competitive events. If you guys want to get ready for competitive events yourself, considering Nats is coming up soon, check out the Patreon down in the description. You can get the articles that I have posted there if you are interested in that. You can also inquire about coaching if you really want to step your game up leading into national season. Anyways, let's jump right on into the information we have here. We have a London Zenkai Series Regional. We have 74 players, not a bad player size. Best of 3, which always offers really nice data for more games played. And then we have top 16 after Swiss. So we're seeing a lot of what we've seen before. 4 SS4 Gogeta and 6 Red Sin Shenron. Now there's a couple things here. One, between European events, even American events, we've seen flip-flopping as far as which red deck is the more prevalent one in these top cuts. It's been, Sin at the most slots, or it's been Gogeta at the most slots, and it's been switching back and forth. But one thing's for sure, red is super, super dominant in this format. Yes, we talked about how to counter Gogeta and Sin in the more recent videos, but these decks are still very, very powerful and very, very hard to beat. That's usually the case when we make countering videos. It's usually some of the better decks in the meta, and it's no surprise that red is just overly, overly dominant. We will talk more about that dynamic after we cover more of the top cut here. We have 2 yellow trunks, though. This is looking to be the only yellow deck in this top 16. We've seen some Kid Goku Reboot do well. We've seen some yellow trunks do well. I think those are our only real contenders for top cuts as far as the past 3 weeks have gone. We are 3 weeks into Zenkai, and the data is starting to solidify again with tons and tons of red taking up top cuts. And even though blue seems to be the one kind of like anti-red bastion, we haven't seen like a ton of it. It's not highly repped. It does go pretty far in a tournament, surprisingly enough, or maybe not surprisingly enough, considering it has some of the best answers to these red decks, but still like not as played as red is in this format. So moving on from yellow, we have blue-red launch, which for all intents and purposes is kind of a blue deck in the way that it plays. It's much more slow, much more controlly, but you do have access to some of red's better tools, like the barrier removal. Of course, the cooler arrival stuff is really solid, and launch just draws a fistful of cards, so that's real nice. Halo Goku doing well in this top 16. We are going to break the top 8 after we talk about the top 16, but Halo Goku making it this far is very, very surprising, especially considering that there's no Gamma and no SS3 reboot here. Halo Goku, I really like how the deck plays, but it's got a real big consistency problem, because if you don't see that North Kai here to cheer on turn 1, the game is going to be rough. Again, I don't have like deck lists for this, unfortunately. If you guys are the European players that participated in this event or have more information, please feel free to drop any deck lists down in the description if you guys have a document for that. Or you guys can always go post deck lists in the Discord, in the Crosswell Discord. Let me know if you're going to do that, and I'll direct people to the Discord to see those. That'd be really cool, actually, if we can kind of just come together and bring those here as a community. But yeah, Halo Goku I think is really cool because it takes advantage of the Z deck very, very well, but it's just not one of the better blue decks in terms of consistency or even power, in my opinion. Goku Netherworld Blitz is a really, really strong card, but it can be hard to set up sometimes. But I think really Halo Goku's problem comes down to that turn 1. If you do not have the method of getting your Angel Halos to the drop on turn 1, you're really not playing the game. I don't even say that as an over exaggeration. It's just the unfortunate truth. Anyways, moving on though, we have 2 green decks in this top 16, one of which is Turtle School. This is not the first time we've seen Turtle School top a European event. I don't think we've seen it top an American event, but this is the second time around we're seeing it top a European event. Again, I think if like the format was a bit slower, not so red based, I think Turtle School could actually shine here. And it's still, in my opinion, like a miracle that one squeaked in the top 16. It's a very cool thing, because against these red decks, Dormant is somewhat effective in the early turns, but I don't think Dormant Potential Unleashed is all that great in the later turns, because by the time you get to those later turns, your opponent's swinging at you with an 8-drop 35k Sin Shenron, which Dormant doesn't actually negate the attack, so you got to deal with that some other way, or you're just getting Gogeta slammed in your face and you can't use Dormant anyway, right? So an interesting dynamic there. But I do think if the format slows down considerably and more blue becomes more dominant, I do think Turtle School with the Fate Rivals combo can be pretty good. And then Gotenks Reboot. I mean, for green decks that we're expecting to do well this format, Gotenks is among the top 2 in my opinion, between Gotenks and King Piccolo, which obviously is not part of this top 16. But I do think Gotenks is one that people expect. If any green deck's going to top, it's probably going to be Gotenks. Right now, let's actually break the top 8 and talk a bit more about what decks made it the furthest. So this is the actual ranking after top 8 was played off, as far as I'm understanding. So we have SS4 Gogeta in 1st and 2nd place. That's got to be an interesting finals. The SS4 Gogeta mirror match, I've actually been playing a fair amount of this mirror myself, and in my opinion, it comes down to who can stay at higher life longer for a few reasons. One of which, obviously, you're playing a red aggro mirror, so if you're just taking tons of damage early, you're gonna have to spend more cards faster to defend yourself. Whereas if your opponent's sitting at 6th life, they're much more comfortable, even though they can't use their super combo. If they're using a 4-life super combo, that's fine, because you'll eventually have to give them those cards from their life, right? If you're not doing the damage and pressuring early. So their super combos are going to come online at some point, and all the while they're sitting back and just chilling, you're going to be comboing your entire hand to stay alive. So I think that's a big part of the Gogeta mirror match, as well as when in the mirror match your opponent drops Triumphant Together, the 8 drop. You can afford to take it if you're at 6 life. You don't care if you go to 3. That's perfectly fine. It's more of a matter of when your opponent drops Triumphant Together and you're at 3 life, that's when it's much more scary. So I think that's a big component to the mirror match. And then we do have one more SS4 Gogeta in 8th place. So out of the, I think it was 4 SS4 Gogetas in top 16, 3 of them made it to top 8. And then Sin Shenron in general, before I talk about Red Yellow, is taking up 4 slots of this top 8, 50% of the top 8, and 7 out of 8 of the top 8 were red. And of course there's one red yellow variant, which in my personal opinion is actually the best variant of Sin Shenron, because in my opinion, Sin Shenron's biggest problem is Violent Rays, and to a slightly lesser degree Forbidden Power and Flying Nimbus, because those battle card negates, especially with all these non-unison Shenron builds running around, are a big problem for red Sin Shenron. Most of your aggression's coming from these 20k or higher battle cards. So if you're locked out in a red mirror, which is most of the field right now, from Violent Rays, you need some sort of method of answering that Violent Rays. And I think that Almighty Resistance fits perfectly into Sin Shenron. I don't really think it like detracts from what the deck wants to do. So I think it's just a perfect fit. And if I was to play Sin in a tournament, it would almost definitely be red yellow. I do have a build on Patreon if you guys want to check that out. I know I mentioned it earlier in the video for competitive purposes, but again, I do have my red yellow Sin build on the Patreon. I think it's very good. And again, it doesn't really like cut into the deck's consistency. It doesn't really detract from what the deck wants to do. I think it's very good. Now, here in this top 8, what's interesting is there's one yellow representative and no blue representatives. At least from what we've seen from like these American events, but even a little bit in the European events, blue has been the one color that if any color has a shot of dealing with red, it's blue. And mainly it's been SS3 Reboot, but we've seen a fair amount of Gamma topping as well. So that's another fair contender up in the mix. But here we have one yellow Trunks. Now, can yellow deal with what red is doing? I think so, and I think yellow is a little bit harder to play in this format, mainly because you don't have a leader that gives you 3 free energy at the end of the turn. That's going to make like managing your resources much more difficult. But I do think yellow has the tools to deal with what red wants to do, much like blue does. But it's probably a bit harder to play. And I will say too, like up against SS4 Gogeta in particular, the games are much easier when you actually draw your Piccolo Gohan SCR, because that's one time that you're comboing out of their 8 drop by spending no cards. Like that's a really good trade there, and you can take advantage of that game very quickly. But in games that you don't draw your SCR, or in games that, especially when you're not well versed in the matchup, I think it can be very difficult. Yellow Trunks, also worth noting, has almost exclusively been adopting the Slug engine, which is actually very good against SS4 Gogeta, because if you establish Slug early enough, you can actually like lock them out of the game pretty fairly well, and then you're basically forcing them to have to draw into SSB Kaioken, Concentrated Destruction, Goku, and you're turning off a lot of their search and draw effects that would get them deeper into their deck to find that out. And yeah, Slug just prevents them from finding it. They have to hard draw it for turn, or draw it off their leader, or search it off their leader if they're still on their unawakened side. But yeah, that's a really good answer to red right now, which is in Yellow Trunks. I think it would be a little bit harder to fit it into Kid Goku Reboot, just from the way that I've been playing the deck. But theoretically, it's another yellow deck that has a ton of barrier battle cards, so that bond engine should be fairly easy to set up. But yeah, so far it's been seeing a lot of success in Yellow Trunks. That might be the way to go from here. But that covers the top 8 here. I mean, obviously a ton of red, but I want to talk about this dynamic, because what we've been seeing in European events is a lot different than what we've been seeing in American events. So in these European events, of which I've covered the past 3 weeks, we have seen anywhere from 50% or more of the field. I think even last week we saw 70% of the field in the tournament was playing red, which is just crazy in and of itself, right? That means red is an overly dominant color. And in these European tournaments, we've pretty much been seeing red win. It's either Sin Shenron or SS4 Gogeta. But the 2 American events we've had, we've exclusively seen SS3 Reboot take the first place spot, even though that these top cuts have been filled with a ton of Sin and a ton of Gogeta. So what's going on here? What's the dynamic? It's a really interesting one to look at, to be honest, because many people view SS3 Reboot as the hard counter to SS4 and even like Sin to a degree, because 1, you have Dirty Burst, 2, you have a leader that gives you 3 free energy at the end of each turn. You've got big boss monsters that eventually become difficult for the red decks to deal with if you can stabilize as the blue deck. Blue Unison, while technically easier to remove than ever, is still a really good card against these red decks because it just gives them one more obstacle and it's constantly increasing your hand size as you manage to get there. And of course, if you successfully get to SS4 Vegeta Rise of the Super Warrior, you're drawing 4 cards per turn, untapping 3 to 4 energy per turn. It's really, really strong. So does this deck like exclusively hard counter SS4 Gogeta or Sin Shenron? Sin Shenron maybe a little bit, especially the non-Unison build, but SS4 Gogeta, I'm not completely convinced yet, and that kind of comes a lot from my own testing. But I mean, if any deck stands a chance, maybe it's SS3. But one thing I noticed from these American events that several of the deck lists only showed up with 2 Broly Crowns in their entire main and side deck, which to me is a pretty crazy concept. Like if you have the ability to play Broly Crown for free and you're not playing 4 copies somewhere in your 65. That's pretty insane, and that can very well easily lead to you know, blue decks beating SS4 Gogeta, right? Whether you don't play a high level or high number of Broly Crowns, or you don't happen to draw them in a given game, that's going to give you a real rough time against blue. But yeah, man, if you're not playing 4 copies of Broly Crown in your SS4 Gogeta deck, you know, some combination of main deck and side deck, yeah, don't expect to beat blue all that much. But if you do have the 4 Broly Crowns, blue almost feels easy, especially going first, man. I don't know. That's just been my experience with it. Might be a hot take, might be a controversial thing, but let me know in the comments below what you think about that. Of course, I'm sure you guys have various different opinions about that. But yeah, man, I think it's getting safe to say that it's toss up for best deck in format between Sin and Gogeta. And by the way, that's okay too. Like, yes, red has had a history in this game of being very, very strong, and sometimes even on the degenerate side with a lot of like free play aggro decks and stuff. Like I think about King Vegeta turn 2 or King Piccolo in its full power form. But you know, it's okay to not have a like incredibly diverse format every single time, especially when you're coming off of like incredibly diverse formats. Like for how long? Like a year plus, we had like tons of different leaders in all the top cuts, and now we're just starting to see a more of a centralized red meta. It doesn't mean the game is in a bad place, doesn't mean the game is like dying or anything. It just means that, you know, on the next ban list we probably see some sort of addressing thing with red here, right? We got to do something about it to kind of bring it back in line. And if they want to do that in like an emergency ban list level, I don't think they have to personally. I think the format can still develop. I think yellow can actually definitely go through some innovations to start beating red, but I don't know. That's just my opinion. Let me know in the comments below what you guys think about this. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.